Welcome to Engage,
where we are inspired by Jesus impacting our city and the world.
Living this way is an art form that is best when practiced together. We do this together by resisting apathy,
Welcoming everyone and making sure no one is left out.
participating in remedying the concerns of those around us and around the world.
Telling our stories, and just by actually being, eating, and doing life together.
We believe that every day is another chance to live by faith
Labor in love.
and endure with hope. Join us, create with us,
as we follow the brushstrokes of the Creator. Welcome to Engage.
God is my shepherd, I won't be wanting, I won't be wanting. He makes me rest in fields of green, with quiet streams. Even though I walk through the valley of death and dying, I will not fear, 'cause you with me, you with me. Your shepherd's staff comforts me. You are my feast in the presence of enemies. Surely goodness will follow me, in the house of God forever. God is my shepherd, I won't be wanting, I won't be wanting. He makes me rest in fields of green, with quiet streams. Even though I walk through the valley of death and dying, I will not fear, 'cause you're with me, you're with me. Your shepherd's staff comforts me. You are my feast in the presence of enemies. Surely goodness will follow me, in the house of God forever. House of God forever. One more time. In the house of God forever.
The Sivrite home, like many homes around the world, is getting very excited for the Summer Olympics. In less than a week, our house is going to go from being full of people who know nothing and don't care about sports like trampoline jumping to being a house full of people who are yelling at the screen for every single sport, no matter what it is. We absolutely love it. And it's like that really for every Olympics in the Sivrite house. We enjoy it, but this time does feel really special, and it's mainly because of the extraordinary story of a woman named Simone Biles. She is the GOAT of women's gymnastics, and as great as she is at the sport, her story is almost even greater. Most people know a lot about it, but last Olympics in Tokyo, Biles dealt with a mental health issue that actually caused her to withdraw from the competition. So my wife and I, in preparation for the games, we watched this documentary. It's called Simone Biles Rising. And it was so cool to see behind the scenes of that whole situation and to hear what she was thinking and feeling as that was going on. And at one point in the documentary, she talks about the 2016 Rio Games. It was her first ever Olympics. And that was when she really burst onto the scene and became a known person to those that don't follow gymnastics regularly. She was a superstar. She won 5 medals, 4 of them are gold, and it occurred to her after the games that she had just accomplished her lifelong dream at the age of 19. And in the documentary, she says basically that her thought was like, what in the world do I do now? She was in need of a reimagining of life, of gymnastics after those Rio Games. And I hate to speculate too much, especially when it comes to people's mental health journeys, but it seemed as though between the Rio Games and the Tokyo Games that reimagining didn't happen for her. And now that may or may not have played a part in what happened at the Tokyo Games, but the beautiful thing about the documentary was this. Watching her after Tokyo and all that happened, withdrawing from those games, watching her actually do that work of reimagining her life, her relationships, her emotions, her mental health, and of course, her gymnastics. And now who knows what's going to happen at these games, the summer games in Paris. Doesn't really matter to me, honestly. Simone Biles, her resiliency, her strength in many different ways, that alone makes her a legend in my book and many people's books. So this work of reimagining something, it is very hard to do, especially when you're reimagining something that you think you understand. If anyone understood gymnastics and the life around gymnastics, it was Simone Biles, until the day that she didn't. And then she had to reimagine what could be. In the book of Leviticus, first of all, the book of Leviticus is not exactly a page turner. It's not one that you're turning to if you're looking for like enthralling storyline. But the fascinating thing about the book is that God is attempting to get the Hebrew people to reimagine the possibilities of their life and their life together. They are fresh out of captivity in Egypt. They've never known what it's like to be a free people. So God is basically laying out these laws and these practices to help them think differently about what it means to be a community, what it looks like to be a community that is living together. So, of course, some of those laws and practices include and deal with resources. They've never had to deal with that before. And the only system around resources that they know is Egypt. And what was going on there is that those who did have, they had a lot. And those who didn't have, they were never going to have very much. There wasn't a whole lot of distribution of resources to those in need going on in Egypt. So one of the ways that God attempts to help the people reimagine resources is around this practice of gleaning. Now, gleaning, that was when someone with a field to farm would work to the very edges of their land, basically going over their land twice, 3 times to make sure that they harvested like every single possible piece of grain. And what God said to them is, don't do that. Don't do that. Instead, when it comes to the edges or what you might have left behind, just leave it. That way, the people who are in need can come and gather what they need from what is left over of your field. Now, a good modern day comparison when I was trying to think about this, it might be like retirement funds. Now listen, as a person who's trying to figure out what my retirement is even going to look like, I'm not saying that these are inherently evil things. But remember, this is about reimagining. It's about our mindset, the thought process behind certain things. And sometimes The thought process behind retirement is that we need to gather every single dollar from every single place we can find it to make sure that we have security and comfort. And what God is saying to them and to us is don't do that. Instead, just leave the edges to those who are in need. And you can see what God is trying to get them to reimagine about the resources. It's great to have them. It's not a bad thing to have resources, but they are not a means to your security and comfort. I'm the one that brought you out of Egypt. I am the means for your security and comfort. That's me. Find your security and comfort in me. Your resources are a means to help others. So, another somewhat even more revolutionary practice that God is putting before the people, the Hebrew people, was the year of Jubilee. It sounds like an awesome time, sounds like a blast, and it probably was, right? I guess it kind of depended upon where you were at in your life and how much you were actually able to reimagine things when it came to resources. So without getting into all the 10th day of the 7th month and the 7 times 7 years, all that stuff, which has great meaning, Jubilee was basically about returning home, leaving behind whatever you did or did not make of yourself and going back home. Leviticus 25:11 says, "The 50th year shall be a jubilee for you. Do not sow and do not reap what grows of itself or harvest the untended vines." Basically, when Jubilee came, your stuff became everyone's stuff. My kids would not like this one at all. But again, God is trying to get them to think about this differently. Find your security and your comfort in me, not what you've made for yourself. Your resources are a means to help others, the community. Now, it probably goes without saying, but this reimagining that God is asking the Hebrew people to do, it doesn't stick. We don't really know why, or maybe we can actually easily know why, because we see it all the time. But regardless, they fall back into this thought process that I need to take all I can get for myself. In Mark 12, we see that this thought process of getting all I can for myself is even crept into the practices of the synagogue. Jesus has some harsh words for these teachers of the law who are making their riches basically off the backs of widows and others who need their help and have very little. So Jesus sits down with his disciples across from where offerings are being given to the temple treasury. And rich people are making a really big show of this, showing off how much they're able to put in. And then there's a poor widow who comes forward, and she lays 2 small copper coins in. These would be worth almost nothing, like a few cents. And Jesus calls his disciples over, and he draws their attention to this widow's offering. He says in Mark 12:43 and 44, "Truly I tell you, this poor widow has put more into the treasury than all the others. They all gave out of their wealth, but she, out of her poverty, put in everything, all she had to live on." When it comes to this scripture, what we need to understand in this teaching from Jesus is that 2 things can be true about this teaching. I've always thought of it as just the one thing, that Jesus was lifting up this widow as a shining example of how to give everything you have to the Lord, right? And she is really doing it, right? She is putting her comfort and security in God's hands, giving all of what she has to God's kingdom. And this can be true about this teaching, but also this can be true. Jesus wants his disciples to understand what a jacked up system this is. A system and the thought behind the system that creates this scenario that they just saw. This is not at all what God envisioned in the book of Leviticus. And Jesus wants his disciples to be in the practice of calling out these systems. Calling out those systems so that we can reimagine something better than this. I live here in Kansas City, and I used to work down at 29th and Troost when I was in my mid-20s. And if you know anything about Kansas City and the history of Kansas City, you know that that area, that line actually, Troost, is like a dividing line in so many ways, racially, socioeconomically. It is just a dividing line of Kansas City. And I was trying to make some strides in this area, being a missional person with the resources that I had. This is the first real job that I'd ever had, so I wanted to use it to help others. So I started doing this practice. I committed to, if someone came up to me, which was pretty common occurrence on Troost, if someone came up to me and asked for money, I would give them everything I had in my wallet. Now, it usually wasn't very much, but this was a time when people actually carried wallets, so I would have some cash in there, and that was my commitment. I would hand over whatever cash I had. So I remember one day, a man came up to me as I was walking to my car from work, and he told me the story of why he needed money. It was a pretty common thing to hear, but he said he had children and he needed diapers. Now, whether this is true or not, we don't know, but that was a common thing for people to say. Need money for diapers for my kids. And he also told me about an altercation he had gotten into where he broke his jaw, and he showed me some wiring in his mouth to prove that that was the case. And because of the commitment I had made, I just handed over the cash I had in my wallet, went on my way thinking that, great, I'd followed through with my commitment. I'd help this man with the resources that I had. Now, another day, walking to my car from work, and a woman came up to me. I could tell just from looking at her that she was in a bad spot. She had had the earrings ripped from her ears, and she was bleeding. She had just been in a domestic dispute situation, and she was just coming to me really just asking what to do. That particular day, I didn't have any money in my wallet. And so I couldn't just hand her over the money and go on my way thinking that I'd done a good job. I had to actually think about, okay, what do I have at my disposal to help this woman? She was in a frantic state, so I had a calmer mind to think about what she actually needed. She needed to get to the hospital. She needed to be connected with people that were around her, her community of faith or her family, to make them aware of the situation. So these were the things I was able to do. I was able to make sure that she could get to the hospital. I was able to connect with her family, with her place of faith, and let them know what was going on, connect them to where she was at the hospital so that they could actually come and take care of her. These were the resources that I had at hand. And when I left that situation, I remember feeling so much better about that than the situation with the man, because I'd actually taken the time to reimagine, what can I do with what I have at hand to help others? I don't really know what happened between Leviticus and Mark to create the system that caused that scene with the poor widow at the synagogue. But I wonder if the practices with their resources lost the imagination behind them. Like, I had a practice of giving everything I had in my wallet, but what I lost was the imagination of thinking about the system that caused those people to be where they were. I lost the imagination of actually thinking about how I could use whatever I had at my disposal to help them in the situation that they were in. This is the thought process that God calls us to. Our safety and security should be left to God. When people start stripping their fields bare, so to speak, it creates these systems that need to be called out. And our own resources, our money story, needs to stand in stark contrast to those systems. Our security is in God, our means to help others. The real tragedy behind the widow's offering story is that it's still happening. We see it everywhere we look in the world today. We can look at the broken systems in our lives and in the world and wonder, man, where do we even begin reimagining this? And we start where God started with the Hebrew people. It's a shift in our mindset, our thinking, our imagination. that then naturally begins to lay the groundwork for the new systems and structures. When we reimagine a better story for our money, for our resources, that dreaming or envisioning lays the foundation for the better days that are ahead for all of us. So, start here. What is one way you would like to use your money or your resources to help someone else? What is just one way that you can use what you have at your disposal to help someone else?